Hey everybody, well I'm back for chapter 2 and I'm just going to give you a little heads up. One of my dogs, my little Chihuahua, Mija, is being a little sassy downstairs, so you might hear her bark. And my cat, my office manager, is looking over my shoulder like, right here. So he might get in the shot too or pester me or knock something over. If that happens, you'll see me pull out my weapon, which is water and the squirt gun. Got to make sure I got enough ammunition. That'll straighten everybody out. So chapter 2. Now chapter 2 starts and discusses this idea of personality traits and leadership. That's that first category we talked about in chapter 1, which is the trait theory. And when we look at that, that's why you're going to take these personal assessments. You're doing the Big 5 personality profile, because you're talking about, we're trying to narrow down, and this is real, this is as scientific as we can get with this, but people are complicated beings, right? So when we talk about personality or personality traits and things like that, we have to be mindful that it's a combination of a lot of things that are sometimes don't seem to match, and we don't know why, right? So that's why the book talks about how personality and traits are different but related. Traits are distinguishing personality characteristics. You can read that in the book, right? And then personality is a combination of traits that classifies an individual's behavior, right? Together, all of that sort of tries to help explain why people behave the way that they do. And that's one of the reasons why we want to study this. If I can understand this better, I love the example the book gives. Like, why is it important to understand this? Well, when I'm working with my employees or with my students, now it's with students, before my other life it was employees, right? Understanding them better helps me lead better. So I love the example they give here and why understanding personality is important. It says, for a simple example, if you know Kate is very shy, you can better understand why she's quiet when meeting new people, right? It would also give you a really good clue that maybe that's why she's quiet in meetings. It's not that she doesn't care. It's not that she's preoccupied. She's basically shy, right? It also goes on to say you can also predict that Kate will be quiet when she goes places and meets new people outside the workplace, right? If you're not comfortable, if you're shy around your coworkers who you see every day, how are you going to be in a room full of strangers? Now, we're surmising that the current behavior is a predictor of future behavior, right? You can also better understand why Kate may not seek a job as a salesperson, right? And if she did, you might predict that she wouldn't be necessarily very successful at that. So maybe you have an employee who's looking for a promotion. They can't really go any farther in the department that they're in, and they see that there's an opening for a sales position, and sales pay very, very well, very, very well. Right? So they think, well, we just had another child. I need to make more money or whatever it is. I think I'm going to give that a shot. You don't want to dash people, say, listen, that's not a job for you. You're too shy. You sit down and you help them brainstorm ideas of their likelihood for success and make sure that they clearly, this is the coaching, mentoring, teaching, training. That's big stuff under that hat, under that leader hat that you have to be able to pull out, right? And say, listen, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's find another way so that you'll be happy and successful at your job. So that's kind of why we try to understand people's personalities. We may never get it, but we can try. Now, then it goes on to talk about personality profiles. And this is when they define it here, individual or identifying individual stronger and weaker traits. Now, be very, very mindful. This book talks about Myers-Briggs and the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. It's easier just to say the MMPI. Be very, very careful. There's a great book out there called The Cult of Personality by Annie Murphy Paul, and she examines a lot of these tests that are very popular. You just heard I use the word popular. Being popular doesn't mean that it's right or accurate at all. In the MMPI, it still has questions along the lines of, if your horse and buggy is hitched up to the hitching post and your horse acts up, do you beat it with a whip? Right. I don't know about you, but I left my horse and buggy a long time ago, right? And the Myers-Briggs, if you look at the history of how it was developed, it was basically developed by a housewife and her daughter with no real scientific training. Okay, these are fun to take and they're very insightful. And I know I'm going to have a whole handful of students going, oh, we do that at our job. These are very important. They help us, when we're hiring, trying to get the right people. Be very well. That's why you should read books like The Cult of Personality, because she's an investigative reporter, and she cites the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court where people have used these kinds of tests to make decisions in the workplace, and they lost every time, right? So, but with that said, that's why you don't see us using these in this textbook. Their surveys are based on different things, and they're based on people that do this for a living and their research and all other good stuff. But again, and this book cautions us throughout, that doesn't still mean that you can really know anyone to their core, right? Now, job performance, why we do this is to help with understand this idea of job performance. And then looking at how the big five, the self-assessment you just took, how does that correlate with leadership, right? So, for example, if you look at the big five and how it correlates with leadership, after you took your self-assessment, right, and you learned your score, right, on surgency, conscientiousness, openness to experience, oh, here it is right here, agreeableness, and then adjustment. Well, it says the highest correlation with leadership was surgency, and followed by conscientiousness and openness to experience. Agreeableness was weakly correlated, and adjustment was even negatively correlated. So in other words, and I love that they say, in other words, people high in surgency are often perceived as leadership-like people, right? They're willing to take charge. They work really hard. They bring about change, those kinds of things. But they're not necessarily the type of people that are really concerned with being liked or trying to please other people. But they're still stable, and they're often not overly emotional, right? So there's hope for us introverts, right? Because I'm an introvert, believe it or not. Now, how we get derailed, I like that they include this here too, derailed leadership traits. And you guys are going to do some of this on one of your activities in the agenda, so I'm not going to get into that and whether we can improve or not, so I'm not going to talk any more about that, but pay close attention to it. Leadership trait, universality. Is that a real word? I see it in print here, but I'm not sure if that's a real word. This is, again, where we have to be really super careful. And I'm just going to read this paragraph. In applying the trait theory, we need to remember that there are traits that many successful leaders have, and we'll look at those in the major sections of the book, right? But there's no agreed upon list. There's no agreed upon list of traits that leaders need to be successful, right? So you don't have to have all of them, right, to be successful. That would be like superhuman, right? You'd have superpowers if you had that. But I like that they give example. Like, we love these kinds of statistics, and this is 30% of CEOs are 6'2" or are taller, right? Whereas only 4% of the U.S. population is of that height. A lot of people say, well, see, we don't hire short people. I don't know if that's a correlation. Because that means that there's 70% of the CEOs aren't 6'2", right? And I'm sure some of them are successful. And oh, here's the thing on extroverts. Successful leaders are commonly extroverts, but 40% of CEOs describe themselves as introverts. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Charles Schwab. I'm a complete introvert, but I talk for a living. I love helping people. I worked retail. I've worked front lines. I've done a million different things, always involving customer service. But the minute I'm not doing that, I'm alone, and I like it. I even go on vacation alone. You'll probably hear me yak about some of that at some point, right? Now we're going to look at the big five, including the traits of effective leaders. And we won't get too far into the weeds with this, just so that you kind of understand it better, just because it's new vocabulary. So when you took that big five personality, that self-assessment, one of the scores was for surgency. Surgency, geez, can we just say dominance? Dominance just sounds like a negative term. Surgency is just that, and they include the definitions here: dominance, extroversion, and high energy with determination. I get all of that, right, except for the extrovert part. Very high energy, and surgency is my highest one. But I will sit back very quietly if somebody else is leading. I don't don't need to be the one talking all the time, and I'm usually pretty darn quiet in meetings, actually. So we don't necessarily have to have all of these traits to be successful, right? Agreeableness. This is how sociable you are. I don't do any social media. I'm not a social butterfly whatsoever. I love to be invited, and there's some things I'll go to, but 99% of the time I don't go to things. I don't seek out crowds. I actually take vacations to the most remote places I can find, whether it's in the state of Wisconsin, the United States, or in the many countries that I've traveled to. I'm not going to, like, the cool resort thing where all the people are, that kind of thing. But again, that doesn't mean that I can't be successful. I'm just not sociable that way. I'm an introvert. But I'm very, very sensitive, and I have a very high EI, which is the emotional intelligence they're talking about, meaning that I can be very, very in tune to what other people are doing. They give us a list here, like self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship management. I'm very good at all of that. I'm just not going to go out and seek a social situation and perform, so to speak. Adjustment just means being stable or having self-control. People that are high in adjustment are often self-confident. They have that high emotional intelligence again. Well, and there might be a mix of narcissism. And I know a few people that fall under that category. That's when sort of self-confidence crosses over into this strange idea of I'm the smartest one in the room. People like that scare me. Conscientiousness, that's just another word for being very responsible, very dependable. People can rely on you and they trust you, right? Again, you're going to see those things like high energy, integrity, self-confidence. Openness. This is the trying new things. Oh my gosh, if I have to do the same thing like 2 times in a row, I'm so bored, right? There's very few things where I ever go do twice. Like I know people that go to vacation or go camping or whatever to the same exact place every year. I'm most likely not going to do that. There's a couple things that I do on a regular basis once a year, only because I can't find it anywhere else, like dog sledding in northern Wisconsin or northern Minnesota. I can't find that anywhere else, and I don't have time to like go out west or something to do it in the winter time. But again, you're seeing these traits that go along with this openness, like the flexibility, the intelligence, locus of control. Are you responsible for your actions? If you have an internal locus of control, you can say, well, that was my fault, and I'm very sorry about it. I didn't mean to do that, and fess up and take responsibility. An external locus of control, often those people are feeling like everybody's against them, right? It's never my fault. The personality, now let's move on to the next section, the personality profile of effective leaders. Now this goes into this idea of this theory business again. So again, we just need to talk a little bit about it. So the first theory is the achievement motivation theory. That was McClellan's theory, came around like the 1940s, right? And if you read the definition here, attempts to explain and predict behavior and performance based on the person's need for achievement, power, and affiliation. Okay, and what McClellan told us is this need for achievement, for example, and that coincides with that conscientiousness, right, of the big 5, in that. And I'm very high in that. Oh my gosh, I'm very detail oriented. I don't like making mistakes, like for you guys in my classroom or on my Blackboard sites. That's why I always ask you, please tell me if you catch a typo, something doesn't make sense, I put in the wrong date, or Rox, something's not opening. Please tell me, because. And I also have a very high internal locus of control. It's like, well, I made that thing. I must have been sleeping when I did it. But, if you tell me, oh my gosh, thank you, because I can fix it in real time, right? Not next term or something. I'll go in there and do it right away. And McClellan also then talks about this need for power. Now, power, we're going to talk about power in another chapter. It's my favorite topic. Oh my gosh. But the need for power sounds like a bad thing. They're power hungry. We say terms like that, but this aligns with that surgency on that self-assessment that you took. And of course, I have a very high need for power and a high need for surgency, and it makes sense for me. Not in the sense that I want to be the leader, because I'm a totally fabulous follower, by the way. I could let somebody else do the work, no problem. But I'm not going to sit back and wait for bad things to happen and not speak up or, take the lead when I need to. And also, when it comes to influencing, maybe that's why I ended up being a teacher, right? To help other people. And to do that, you need to be able to influence in a way that makes them successful, right? And then this need for affiliation, that's my lowest score. Duh. You know, when I took the big five, my need for this whole idea of agreeableness, I was low. That's my lowest score there too, right? Because I don't really care what people think about me. I don't like, you're going to see, like, I'm not too dialed up here. I just did a swim this morning and had a beanie cap on. Gosh, don't run into me at the grocery store. You'll never know it's me. Things like that. But sometimes that can be detrimental to me or to someone in a leadership role if you can't cross the line, like do and get involved in networking, because this hinders your ability to do that. And then it goes on to talk about the motive, doing your motive profile. And you guys are going to do this as part of one of your exercises. It's that next self-assessment number 2. And then the leader motive profile, that's the LMP McClellan's, that's his theory. So basically these guys are like fancy scientist guys. They came up with their theory. And so the second theory we're going to talk about now is that leader motive profile theory. And just like the book describes it, as attempts to explain and predict leadership success based on the person's need for achievement, power, and affiliation, which was McClellan's ideas that we just looked at. And McClellan found that the effective leaders consistently have the same motive profiles. And so they're trying to look at what's a predictor. We're trying to predict things here, right? So first, the book wants to define leader profile. They define it as the leader motive profile, or the LMP, includes a need for power, which is socialized, that is greater than the need for affiliation, and with a moderate need for achievement. So again, it's pretty much kind of the same thing that McClellan was saying. And it's not, we have power, they describe power, and again, it's not a bad thing. Power is not a bad thing. And then they talk about socialized power, which is even more interesting, because McClellan, he talked about the idea of power not being good or bad. And I agree, power in itself is not good or bad. It's how we end up using it, right? So when they talk about socialized versus personalized power, that's the big difference. And I think they talk about it here. Effective leaders use socialized power, which includes the traits of being sensitive to other people and having good EI, again, emotional intelligence, over just thinking about yourself, that personalized power. And then he talks about achievement and conscientiousness, which we've really already talked about. And then this idea of affiliation. And again, we've talked about that as well. Having this need, and he talks about here, effective leaders have a lower need for affiliation than power. But sometimes this can get in the way of how we influence our followers. I have a note in my margin here. I'm not sure why. Let me read this. Oh, they're giving the counterpoint to this. And I made note of it in the margin. When leaders with a high need for affiliation, they tend to have a lower need for power. And then they might be reluctant to play the bad guy role, such as disciplining or influencing followers in a negative way. Oh boy, do I know somebody like that. They really like to be in charge, but they really don't want anybody to know that. And they're very passive aggressive in that way. So then they don't want to do the discipline. They don't want to do the hard stuff. They like all of the grand stuff, right? So they have a little bit more invested in personalized power than social power. Leadership attitudes, that's the theory X and theory Y, and you're actually going to be doing this in an exercise as well. They just define it here for us, which is, you can read that on your own. And then they talk about the Pygmalion effect. And the theory X and theory Y, again, when you take the little survey, those are generalities. But, you know, McGregor talked about it, and he was saying that theory X and theory Y, people with theory X attitudes hold that employees dislike work and they must be closely supervised, right? If you're an autocratic, do it my way, hand out the orders, you're probably a theory X. Theory Y attitudes tend to, the theory Y attitude holds that employees really do like to work. They really don't want to, you know, nobody gets up in the morning and says, geez, I hope I have a really crappy day. I hope it sucks at work today, right? I think most people want to go to their job and have a good day, right? That's theory Y. So you guys are going to take some surveys here to help you walk through that. And then the Pygmalion effect. You should already know what this is, because I know in my classes I've talked about it in the supervision course, the personal skills course, and another course. We talk a lot about this Pygmalion effect. This is best described for me when I think about it. The best example is when we look at kids. If you tell a kid long enough and hard enough how stupid they are, that's how they'll begin to act. They will believe you. Well, adults do the same thing. If you keep harping on somebody about something, it can really destroy their self-confidence, right? So the Pygmalion effect says proposes that leaders' attitudes toward and expectations of their followers and their treatment of them explain and predict the followers' behavior and performance. It is 100% true. I've watched it happen over and over. When I look at you and my students, if I said to you, oh my gosh, I'm going to talk about this chapter, you're never going to get it. That's why I'm doing the chapter overview. It's ridiculous. I'm here to help sort out some of the things that I know a little bit more about. That's all. You're going to have a problem with any of this. I already know that. So why would I tell people that? Sometimes it makes other people feel good to tell other people how bad they are. And that's pretty blunt, but it's pretty true. Then the next they go on to the idea of that self-concept. And that has to do with that positive and negative attitude about yourself, right? And again, that has a little bit to do with, which one? I have to go all the way back. I can't go back. My brain's freezing up. But it has to do with your positive attitude and your self-concept. And then they give us a whole list. There's 11 of these you can read through about developing a more positive attitude and self-concept. We can definitely change that. You know what? When, you know, from childhood to adulthood, you may have been raised however you've been raised. If someone hasn't been supportive and you haven't had that kind of basis your whole life, and you have this inner voice that's always negative, look how stupid you are. Don't speak up in class. My gosh, you're going to sound stupid, right? It can be really hard to change your attitude and self-concept, but it can be done. You have to look at all the good things that you do, right? And when you do, but it takes work. And like they say, they have 11 different things that talk about that here. And then this chapter wraps up with the whole concept, or the idea of ethical leadership. And again, you're going to do a whole survey here to help you with that. Does it pay? Yes, we already know. And you're going to do an assignment related to that. So I'm not going to go there, but of course we already know it does. We have a lot of concrete information to explain that. And then the last part of this too that feeds into this ethical behavior talks about the 3 factors influencing ethical behavior. The first factor being the personality traits and attitudes. That has an effect on behavior. Your moral development. If you were raised in a way and in a place, a location, whatever, where, you know, like for example, it's against the law, according to international business law, it's against the law to take bribes, right? When you're working in with international contracting and things like that. But it can be very, very hard if you're working with another country that their culture doesn't see it in the same way. They don't see it as a bribe, for example. Like, we can't take bribes. We're not supposed to take bribes. Doctors aren't supposed to take bribes. They're not supposed to be taking any free stuff from the salespeople, right? But if you go to another country where they just see that as a bartering system, that's their everyday life, they think you're nuts. It's like, we don't understand. There might even be a culture that doesn't have even a word in their language for it, right? So the moral development really has a lot to do with where, how, and all of that you were raised. And then, of course, the situation. I always call it that line in the sand. No one is 100% ethical. We're human beings. We make mistakes, right? So maybe we've done some bad things, or we've made terrible mistakes, right? And I call them mistakes because we didn't necessarily get up in the morning and plan it. Now, somebody who does that might be a psychopath. I don't know. But most people don't. So the situation will affect how far we'll go. So would you do the same thing for your child that you would do for a stranger? That kind of thing. So the situation, and they talk about tying all of these things together through integration and that kind of thing. So none of these are stand alone at all. And then there's a lot of ways people justify unethical behavior, and you can read the long list there, which is a sad testament. And again, you're going to be doing these concept applications. And then it wraps up with the guides to ethical behavior, talking about the golden rule, the four-way test. Make sure that you read those. I love, you know, I'm going to give you my mom's test. My mom's ethical guidepost was, okay, Roxanne, whatever it is that I thought I should be doing or whatever, said, I'm going to leave that up to you, but do me a favor. You want to call Grandma and tell her what you're up to? Why don't you talk to Grandma about that, what you're up to? Ooh, moms know everything. And I'm like, well, hell no, man. I don't want to tell Grandma. That'd be horrible. Then I probably shouldn't be doing it. I probably shouldn't consider jumping off the bridge, right? Then the last part of this is the stakeholder approach to ethics, and this is pretty straightforward. And then that wraps up with this idea of being an ethical leader, okay, which should be our goal in life, not just in leadership. So again, oh my gosh, 25 minutes. Geez, these chapters are brutal. We'll see you for chapter 3. Bye.